that last guy who talked about tucking in his shirt, he'd come back months later and he'd lost even more weight. It was a jump start, really, what we gave him. And he said, he showed me before and after pictures, and he said, they used to call me Big Ed, now they call me Not So Big Ed. All right, guys, you get the point. We are dealing with people with chronic health problems, and our job is to find out why they're going through this and getting them healthy. So I think it's good, because a lot of those news pieces aired years ago, so it's important to kind of know where are they at now, because a lot can change in 10 years. We keep in touch with most of those people, because when you're spending a year of your life and their life focusing on their health journey, you become close to most of them. And where are they at now? They've maintained their biomarkers of health, they're feeling great, they're still, why? It's not because of me, it's not because of some magic pill there is to buy. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there's no such thing as a magic pill. Did you know that? Write it down. First thing learned tonight. There's no quick fix. Again, we're spending about 9 to 12 months of their life focusing on these things and really taking it seriously. But the result is, one of the top words I hear is when I ask, well, what do you miss the most since you've been going through your health problem? And the word is freedom. They say I don't have the energy to do things I want to do. I'm taking the medications that I don't want to be taking. I can't live the life that I want to live because of this health problem that is taking my quality of life down. And it's that inexplicable quality of freedom that's regained when they do not have those things hovering in their life. So before we get into the research and science, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Am I blocking the screen for you guys in the corner? Okay, cool. First of all, I am older than I look, guys, okay? So don't judge me for my boyish good looks. The team says, you need to quit saying that because you're not looking so young these days. My doctorate is from Southern California University of Health Sciences in Los Angeles, and my postdoctoral education and training is in functional medicine and clinical nutrition through the Institute for Functional Medicine and Functional Medicine University. I'm one of MindBodyGreen.com. Does anyone know what MindBodyGreen is? It's one of the largest, if not the largest, wellness website in the world. It's like 50 million reach worldwide, 3 million Facebook followers. I'm one of their course instructors and wellness experts. And clinically, we have a clinic here in Pittsburgh area, right off the Turnpike and the Parkway in the Monroeville area. 80% of our patients aren't in Pennsylvania. They're in other states and countries. We have patients in Europe and Asia, the Middle East, Central and South America, Australia, New Zealand. But about 20% of our patients are local. They're in Pittsburgh. So I'm from Pittsburgh. I grew up in Greensburg, and yeah, this is my home. And we teach, because most of us get to lecture about this stuff all around the world, and we actually are on Facebook Live. There's like 23,000 people watching on Facebook right now. But we teach locally as well. All right, this is MindBodyGreen's like wellness team. There's a couple functional medicine guys like myself, David Perlmutter, Joel Kahn, Terry Walls, we teach at her lecture every year, and Amy Myers, Frank Lippman. There's a few of us, and the rest are in yoga or fitness or something like that. All right. I'm rated one of the top 50 functional medicine doctors by DrAxe.com. And this is myself, Dr. Axe, and Jenny McCarthy. We just spoke at the Autism Education Summit about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. And I'm also a contributor for Goop.com, Gwyneth Paltrow's website, and I was asked to be on the medical advisory board for Goop as well. Okay, so let's go over the main differences between mainstream medicine and functional medicine. I think that's a good place to start. Number one, we interpret labs using a thinner reference range. So you know your labs you get from your doctor. They say, there's your number, and then there's this reference range, this interval of numbers. Does anyone have a good guess about where we get that reference range? Any? Come on, don't be too shy, guys. Where do we get that normal reference range on your lab? From the blood, but where do we get the average? It's from a statistical bell curve average of the population of that specific lab. If you go to another lab, you'll see that reference range will vary from lab to lab. Other than cholesterol and vitamin D, which are standardized, the rest are not standardized. They're based on the population of that lab. Who are people that typically go to labs? People with health problems. So there's a lot of people that go to the doctor, hey, I don't feel well, something's going on in my health, and the labs largely come back, if not entirely come back, quote-unquote normal, even though you know instinctively this isn't normal for you. Or you're told you're just depressed, here's an antidepressant. You just are getting older, you just need to lose weight. All of these well-intentioned reasons as to why you could be having symptoms despite normal labs. What they're unintentionally saying is you're a lot like the other sick people that make up the population of that lab. So if you take people with health problems out of that reference range, what's left is a much thinner interval of numbers where your body is thriving. Your health is fantastic. You don't have to be on medications because you don't need it because you're healthy. That's a much thinner bracket of numbers within that larger reference range. So denoted here in this sort of orange zones, there's a lot of people in that orange zone when they don't feel well, or even worse, they have increased risk factors for chronic disease and dying, but they're still quote-unquote normal. So we are not concerned with just highs and lows in bold fonts. We are concerned with where your physiology is actually functioning the best, or the functional range. A functional blood chemistry analysis can really give you insight into why you feel the way that you do. Because a lot of people, they go from doctor to doctor to doctor with a pile of labs and really nothing to show for it. And all these labs come back normal. If you have symptoms despite normal labs, either they're not running the right labs, or they're not interpreting the labs they are running properly, or both. So that's what tonight really is meant to do, is dig in deeper, find out what's missing in the puzzle piece for many people. Number two, we run more comprehensive labs, which what is tonight really is all about as well, is digging into physiology and how do we find out what's going on with our health. And number three, we take into account biological variability, which just means we're all created differently. There's not a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all approach to getting well. And I've seen great, good, healthy things work great for some people and flare the next person up. And the next person, I don't see it making a difference, good or bad, which isn't good either. So we try not to have a bias as, this is the way that everybody should do things, because I'll be proven wrong the next patient. So we have to look at their labs, we have to look at their health history comprehensively, and then out what actually works in their life and what doesn't work in their life. So this is in a nutshell what functional medicine does. Oops. Oh, why it's doing that? I don't know what's going on here. I'll use manually. All right. I don't know what's going on. Oh, here we go. That's why. All right. Sorry about that, guys. So, the journey through mainstream medicine. Many of you go to your doctor, I want to know what's going on here, and you get these basic labs done, and there's really nothing to show for it. So we understand this is a very defeating, deflating place to be. We have to dig deeper and find out what's going on here. So we're going to go beyond the label. I had a patient tell me about 9-10 years ago. He said, I feel like I'm slapped with a label, and I'm in there for an hour waiting, and seeing the doctor for 5 minutes, and I take this pill, see you in 6 months. We are all, I thought this is a great analogy, and I've been using it for the past 10 years. We're all slapped with a 5-digit, 4-digit number, letter code, the ICD-10 code, and the ICD-10 code is the diagnosis code, and it tells the system, this algorithm, that you get X, Y, and Z, and it's the medications that everybody else with that ICD-10 code has, or they want to put somebody with that ICD-10 code on. So we need to rip that label off and find out what's the core reason of why we're going through what we're going through. And hormonal health is a good starting point to talk about that. So the thyroid hormone specifically, every cell of your body, you have trillions of cells, every cell of your body has a thyroid receptor site. No other hormone can claim that importance. Other than vitamin D, which is sort of a pro-hormone, there's no other hormone that has a receptor site, a key, a lock on every cell of your body. So if your thyroid's not working well, nothing's working well. 20 million Americans have a low thyroid problem in their lifetime, and 1 in 8 women will suffer from a low thyroid problem in her lifetime. If your thyroid's not working well, nothing's working well. You can see here that it's linked to acid reflux, digestive problems, menstrual cycle issues, infertility, depression. Your brain is rich with thyroid receptor sites, high blood pressure, low blood pressure, pulse issues, arrhythmia, skip beats, heart palpitations, high triglycerides, high cholesterol. It inhibits phase 2 and phase 3 liver detoxification pathways if your thyroid levels are off. Many times you see high cholesterol because the thyroid is off. And then we see more heart issues, high C-reactive protein or inflammation, plaque buildup. This is very interesting There's studies to show that a TSH at 2.5 to 3.5, which what's the typical reference range on the lab for a TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, the basic thyroid lab? It's about 0.45 to 4.5. It will vary from lab to lab depending on the people who go to lab, but it's within around that range. If you take people with health problems out of that reference range, the actual functionally healthy TSH is 0.45 to 2. So you could have a TSH at 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5. You're told the thyroid's fine, there's nothing wrong. The problem is, it not only makes you won't feel well, you'll be fatigued and weight loss resistant, you'll have brittle hair and nails, all that stuff, all the stuff we just mentioned as well. But a TSH at 2.5 to 3.5 was associated with a 69% greater risk of dying from a heart attack and stroke. So this is not just about not feeling well, which is certainly important, but far greater things like dying and heart attack and stroke, which sadly is killing 1 out of 2 Americans. So this is a normal TSH, normal, that have increased risk factors. So this really is important from a clinical standpoint. Are medications designed to heal? What would you say, everybody? This side has an opinion, but they are disease-modifying drugs, right? There's a place for them. Can I ask, how many of you are on at least one prescribed medication? Wow. Okay, so almost all of you. How long are you supposed to stay on your medications?
Forever. The doctor tells you not to take anymore.
Yeah, right. Is that healthcare? Can we call that healthcare? I mean, sick care maybe, disease management certainly, right? But ultimately, stay this medication forever and then sell it healthcare. It's not health. There's nothing healthy about it. So let me just say this: we are all consumers in a $1 trillion industry, the food and drug industry, at least $1 billion industry. Do you guys think the industry's on our side?
No.
They want to keep us healthy enough to keep spending money, but sick enough to always be a customer. And the World Health Organization, which is certainly not a fringe group, the WHO said there's an inherent conflict of interest between the legitimate business goals of providers and actually what's rational for the consumer. This is on the WHO's website. So, we're not anti-medication in functional medicine at all. We just ask the question, what is your most effective option that causes you the least amount of side effects? And some people are alive because of medications, but it fits this criteria. But it just so happens that most times medications don't fit this criteria. They have lots of potential side effects. Have you ever watched a drug commercial before? Just because you say it in a chipper voice, like really quickly, doesn't mean we don't know what those words are. Suicidal thoughts, cancer, death. You can get longer eyelashes or something. We all laugh about it, but these things are on the market. And they aren't very effective, which is why many of you said, I'll have to be on these forever, and typically in increasing dosages. So, what are good gauges for assessing our health? Because ultimately, none of us are ultimately sick from a medication deficiency. Would you agree with me? A lack of Lipitor in our body. We're not going to Lipitor ourselves into health one day. We can go off of Lipitor. But your body is alive because of brilliant biochemistry. So what are good gauges for assessing our health? Number one would be your labs. Your labs aren't lying. What do your labs say? Number two would be your medication lists. And has the medication list grown over the past 10 years? If it's grown, why is that? It's because you're getting sicker. What was once kept down with less medications now requires more milligrams, more pharmaceuticals to keep down what was once kept down with a light dosage of something. These are chronic degenerative issues. Keyword degenerative. And I would say number three, put those two into context. Where would your labs be without the medications pushing the numbers down or making the symptoms less on? You can create more normal looking symptoms. You can create more normal looking labs with more medications. Diabetics are a good example of that. Because the people on insulin, they typically have great looking A1Cs, great looking blood sugars, but they're the ones getting the amputations. Are they healthier just because their A1C looks better? Well, there's been studies to show this. The ACCORD study, the Action to Control Cardiovascular Risks in Diabetics. It was an acronym. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2008. Went on for about 3.5 years. They looked at two groups, a control group and a placebo control, a placebo group and a treatment group. The group that had the more normal blood sugars, the group that had the more normal A1Cs, because they were pushed down with more medications, had an increased risk for heart attack and stroke and death. They shut the ACCORD study down. We are not sick from a medication deficiency. And we can't think we can just manipulate physiology and make people live longer. In most cases, that's not possible. So we have to look at the context of why we are sick in the first place, which is not a drug deficiency. So functional medicine, doctors like myself, are like clinical deep sea divers. The conventional model of care largely is concerned with diagnosing a disease, giving an ICD-10 code, and matching it with a medication. If you have high blood pressure, you get a blood pressure medication. You have depression, you get an antidepressant, and so on and so forth. This is medicinal matching game. Other than the medications that they have you on, what other options do you have in the mainstream model of care? Other than more medications, or the advice to go and lose weight, or send to another specialist with more labs and more medications. Other than that, those are the options. We have to start thinking about these things. So what is the training in the standard model of care? I think we went over that. Number 2 is the hammer analogy. I'm really not going to do this, but if I hit somebody in the head with a hammer, that's a really sick analogy, isn't it? I haven't thought of a better one. Sorry about that. You're going to get a what if I do that? A headache. You have 2 options at that point. You could take Tylenol for your headache, or you could tell me to stop freaking hitting you in the head with a hammer. Your body is proverbially hitting you in the head with a hammer. You have to find out why are you having these symptoms, which is not a medication deficiency. So we are all more complex than our TSH. This talk tonight is talking about thyroid health, and we're going to dig deeper than that. But let's start with the thyroid, because it's typically, what do they run on your thyroid panel? They run a TSH, maybe a T4. That's all they need to give you a synthroid or levothyroxine. So we want to find out, let's actually look at the root cause here. So we're going to go on a journey. You guys excited for this journey? God, you're not even eating anymore. Are you guys excited for this journey? Yeah. I can't be more excited than you guys. That would be really embarrassing. Because I've taught this before. It should wear off after a while. But it doesn't. I get excited about this. Okay. So we're going to go over the top thyroid problems that don't show up on conventional labs. All right? So number 1, what do you think it is? I'll just type. Hashimoto's disease. The American Endocrine Society says upwards of 90% of low thyroid function in the United States is autoimmune in nature. This Hashimoto's disease is the first autoimmune disease ever discovered in science in the early 20th century with a guy in Japan with the last name of Hashimoto's. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want a disease named after me, but apparently that was a thing. Egomaniac, maybe, but it was cool. He found something that was cool and he named it after himself. So this hammer analogy is a really good, appropriate analogy for Hashimoto's disease. Because this person, their thyroid, their immune system is proverbially hitting the thyroid on the head. Hashimoto's disease is truly not a primary thyroid problem. The thyroid wants to work well, but the thyroid is victim of the immune system attacking it. The immune system thinks the thyroid is a virus or bacteria and is attacking it. So, why don't they typically test for Hashimoto's? And I know there typically are really advocates for their own health. And with many people, like nurses, in every talk, they ask for these labs. And typically the patient has to ask for the lab to have them run the antibodies to rule out Hashimoto's. Why is that? Why are they testing everybody for Hashimoto's when the American Endocrine Society says 90% has either on the autoimmune spectrum or full-blown Hashimoto's? It doesn't change the treatment. Whether you have true primary hypothyroidism or you have an autoimmune disease that's attacking the thyroid, you both get synthroid or levothyroxine. So it's superfluous lab testing from the standard model of care because the end result's still going to be that medication. But from a functional medicine standpoint, understanding why you have the problem in the first place, which is not a synthroid deficiency, is really important. Because what's the true mechanism that's misfiring here? It's the immune system attacking the thyroid. Until you stop that, and research shows there's a 50 to 70% greater risk if you have Hashimoto's of having other autoimmune spectrum issues. Most of our patients have 2, 3, 4 autoimmune diseases by the time they're finding out what the heck's going on in their health. You have to stop and arrest and dampen the inflammation against the thyroid, and Lord knows what else the immune system's attacking to truly get to the root cause here. Hashimoto's disease. So thyroid peroxidase antibody and thyroid binding globulin antibody are the two antibodies. Number 2, thyroid resistance. Thyroid resistance is a cellular receptor site problem. So the body is producing T4, tyrosine protein, 4 iodine molecules, T4. This is the 90% of the thyroid hormone is produced this way. It is the largely biologically inactive form of the thyroid hormone other than the brain, which does use T4. And then the body has to activate T4 by ripping off an iodine, making it into T3. So T3 is converted from T4 in the liver, 80% is converted in the liver, and 20% is in the gut, in the microbiome. So we have to look at the conversion of T4 to T3, which we'll talk about in a second, but also what happens once it becomes T3. It's the gasoline, every cell of your body needs it, but it has to get on the thyroid receptor site, which every cell of your body has. If your body's receptor sites, the thyroid receptor sites, which are on every cell of your body, are dulled and blunted, it's like a baseball mitt that can't pick up the baseball. It is like a baseball mitt that's worn, that's arthritic, and it can't pick up the baseball. So the problem isn't the thyroid, the problem isn't the conversion, the problem isn't anything but the cellular receptor site for the thyroid hormone. Because you can have a great-looking TSH, you could have a great-looking, perfect dosage of levothyroxine, but if your body's not accepting that baseball, that thyroid hormone, it is pointless. You're still going to feel lousy. You're still going to feel like you have low thyroid symptoms. Fatigue, weight gain, brittle hair and nails, the outer third of your eyebrows are thinning, digestive issues, infertility, all the things we mentioned. Thyroid underconversion. So remember, the body has to make T4 and activate it into T3 in the liver and in the gut. Thyroid underconversion means it's not converting T3 appropriately. So you have, this pattern is commonly associated with chronic adrenal stress, which we'll talk about tonight, and elevated cortisol levels, stress hormone, and it's highly associated in the medical literature to increased risk of heart attack and stroke. Low T3 syndrome. How do you find this? It's by running total T3 and free T3. Unless you're on Cytomel or leothyronine or Armour or Nature Thyroid, they typically will not run T3 because it doesn't change levothyroxine's dosage. They just need T4 because they're giving you a synthetic T4. But you have to know how your body's activating that. So we have to see if you have low T3 syndrome or not. This is the opposite problem. This is thyroid overconversion. Your body's converting T4 to T3 like a champ. Why is this a good thing? Because you have all the bioavailable form of thyroid hormone. Isn't that a good thing? What's too much of a good thing? The body is subject to the Goldilocks principle, right? Not too high, not too low, but just right. And this is definitely appropriate for the thyroid hormone. Too much of it will lead to anxiety and all the hyperthyroid symptoms, but eventually will cause a blunting leading to thyroid resistance. Let me say this about Hashimoto's because I don't want to forget about this. Hashimoto's disease, going back to autoimmune thyroiditis, the Hashimoto's can be times of hypo and times of hyper. You can be in a thyroid storm and feel hyper, but it can crash and go hypo. So, and this is well documented in the literature, is that they go from a psychiatric standpoint, they will be labeled as bipolar. They'll be labeled as manic depressive. But what's happening in these Hashimoto's cases is that they're having an autoimmune disease that's flaring up and then crashing, flaring up and then crashing. So autoimmunity, especially with Hashimoto's disease, has to be ruled out, especially if you have a family history of autoimmune conditions and thyroid issues. I didn't want to forget about that. So the thyroid overconversion is associated with insulin resistance, elevated testosterone levels, women with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. That's thyroid overconversion. This is thyroid binding globulin elevation. Every hormone has to be carried by a protein raft, so to speak, a protein bus. And it has to get off the bus to do its job. So thyroid binding globulin is the thyroid bus. And if you have an elevation of the buses, you have the right number of thyroid hormones, but not enough of the free forms. The free forms of the thyroid hormone are the ones that got off the bus. They're free for your body to use. So thyroid binding globulin elevation, you will have low free T4 and low free T3. This is common with excess estrogen levels, women using birth control pills, and estrogen creams. And this is hypothyroidism secondary to pituitary hypofunction, which is what makes TSH, what makes thyroid stimulating hormone. It's the brain, right? It's the TSH is a pituitary hormone, and it's supposed to tell the thyroid, wake up, wake up. But the thyroid's not getting the message. If your brain is not producing TSH, the thyroid doesn't know what to do. The thyroid just does what the brain tells it to do. So if you have pituitary hypofunction, this leads to actually normal-looking TSH, to actually low TSH. TSH is inversely proportional. So if you have low TSH, it's actually hypothyroid, meaning the brain saying, don't work anymore, you have too much thyroid hormone. So if you have low TSH, it looks normal to hyper, but you run thyroid hormones, it's actually hypo. We see this quite a bit with people under chronic stress. Who's stressed in here? I'm not diagnosing you, I'm just asking. Yeah, it's not. Chronic viral issues like Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, chronic bacterial infections, we see this pituitary hypofunction. And women with amenorrhea, like they're not having their periods, this typically is a problem as well because the hypothalamic pituitary axis is off, not only for the thyroid, but for the ovaries as well. So this is a full thyroid panel. It's hard to read, I know, but I'll just say we run TSH, total T4, free T3, total T3, and then the thyroid antibodies, thyroid peroxidase, and thyroid binding globulin. What are they typically running for everybody in the standard model of care? TSH and T4. This is the 2-piece of about an 8-piece puzzle. Another part here is reverse T3. Has anybody heard of reverse T3? Awesome. So your body converts T4 to T3, right? But then a certain percentage of it is converted into reverse T3 or RT3. What does reverse T3 do? Nothing. So if your body's producing more reverse T3 than T3, that ratio is off. You have an imposter thyroid hormone. It's binding to the thyroid receptor site, and it's actually occupying the thyroid receptor site, so you're going to feel low thyroid. It's called high reverse T3 syndrome. That's another one. So that's common in states of inflammation. If you're in chronic inflammation states, you can have high reverse T3. You could be taking the right amount of Synthroid, but what's your body doing with it? You could be making your own amount of the thyroid hormone by yourself, just great. But what is your body doing with your own thyroid hormone? So which pattern are you? And that's oversimplistic. The body is interconnected. Right? You could have underconversion because of inflammation, because of Hashimoto's, and the inflammation is causing thyroid resistance pattern. It can be multifaceted, and typically is. Or you may be none of these. So I think it's really important to see what is the individual going through. So we're going to dig deeper, guys. Because the thyroid, if your thyroid's not working well, nothing's working well. But then the other systems in the body also influence your thyroid hormone. But conversely, your thyroid hormone also influences other parts of your body. Your body is interconnected. So let's not be so myopic and say it's always just the thyroid, because there are downstream and upstream facets to your health. And we have to look at all the different pathway possibilities down to the individual and see what's relevant for you. So we're going to go over, and I like countdowns, guys. I like bullet points. That's how my mind works. So these are the 7 problems that we see clinically that will wreck someone's health. You excited for this countdown?
Yes.
Is that Dr. Berkowitz I see? Hey, how are you? Nice to see you. All right, so number 1, leptin resistance. Who's heard of leptin? All right, leptin is a hormone that our fat cells produce, right? And the leptin's supposed to tell the brain, the hypothalamic cells of the brain, hey, there's enough of us, burn us off as energy. But the brain is not getting the message. The brain is deaf and blind to leptin's existence. So hypothalamic cells are blunted from leptin. With leptin resistance, this is a form of weight loss resistance. Leptin resistance, you could look at food and gain weight. You could eat like a rabbit and gain weight. So many women are shamed from a very young age, and they're dieting from a young age and, starving themselves and creating unintentionally these hormonal problems, and you cannot ultimately, there's a lot of shame about this, but you cannot heal a body you hate. And ultimately, you have to, forgive yourself with maybe some of the diets that you've done in the past that maybe have made it more difficult to lose weight today. But these hormonal resistance patterns, you have to heal your hormones, you have to heal the receptor sites to overcome these hurdles that have been plaguing many women from a very young age. So, leptin resistance is one of them. So you measure serum leptin, and you see where it's at. If it's through the roof, it means the brain is not getting the message from the fat cells, and the fat cells are trying to tell the brain, there's enough of us, but the brain isn't getting the message. Number 2, insulin resistance. The same mechanism, only different part of the body. Insulin resistance happens primarily in the liver, even though you have peripheral insulin resistance as well. Insulin resistance means the body is producing insulin out of the pancreas, right? Your body breaks down carbohydrates and breaks down protein through gluconeogenesis and breaks it down into glucose. But what does your body do when there's an elevation of glucose? It produces insulin out of the beta cells of the pancreas to get insulin on the insulin receptor sites, the baseball on the baseball mitt, to allow glucose in the cell. Why do you need glucose in your cells? To create energy, ATP, your body's gasoline. So that's happening on the left here. But on the right, that mechanism is dysfunctional. The baseball mitts are not working. They are not picking up the baseball like they should be, so you have a backup of glucose, blood sugar, and you also have a backup of insulin. This is insulin resistance, meaning you have not only hyperglycemia, elevated blood sugar, but you have hyperinsulinemia, excess insulin in the blood. So if you measure serum insulin, this will typically be higher with this problem. Remarkably, 50% of the United States has insulin resistance. 50% of the United States is insulin resistant, pre-diabetic, or diabetic. So like this whole half of the, I don't want to pick on one side, this whole half, just pick a side. The problem is, just because something's common doesn't make it normal. And a lot of these problems are ubiquitous, but they are not normal. They are reversible and preventable and manageable and so overcomeable. So if you can do that, why would you settle for anything less? And people are told there's nothing you can do about this, it's genetic, take this medication, see you in 6 months. The problem is in 91% of cases, that's not true. You can reverse it, you can prevent it, you can manage it, you can get off of medications. Why? Because this is not something you have to settle for. Just because something's common doesn't make it normal. So hyperinsulinemia, why is that a problem? It's the leading cause of heart attack and stroke in the United States. 1 in 2 of us have insulin resistance. 1 in 2 of us are dying from a heart attack and stroke. We have to do something different to see different results. People are sleeping in the front row. I'm not that boring, guys, am I? All right, number 3, adrenal dysfunctions. You have what's called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. So when I say adrenal dysfunction, it really is a brain-based issue. The term adrenal fatigue is really not an adrenal problem. It's a brain-based HPA axis issue. So it's actually a misnomer to call it adrenal fatigue. It's a brain-based fatigue, the HPA axis. So we are looking here, we're HIPAA compliant, guys, we covered up the name. But cortisol is supposed to be higher in the morning, wake you up, and then a nice circadian S-shaped curve throughout the day to then be lower for serotonin to convert into melatonin for you to sleep at night. But this person, who's a public school teacher in Pittsburgh, retired public school teacher, you see where her cortisol levels were. This is where she should be, this is where she is. She was flatlined throughout the whole day with cortisol. Some people think, well, I thought cortisol was bad. So isn't that a good thing that her cortisol was low? Goldilocks principle, guys. Not too high, not too low, but just right. And for cortisol, just right at the right time. So you need cortisol for energy. You need cortisol to regulate your blood sugar. You need cortisol to drive inflammation levels down. So, steroids and hydrocortisone, these are all cortisol derivatives. They bring inflammation levels down. So this is your body's inherent inflammation regulatory system, one of them. And you want to make sure that cortisol is balanced. And balance in your body is a good thing. So cortisol low, you'll feel horrible. This patient, retired school teacher, woke up miserable no matter how much sleep she got. and she said she felt like a truck hit her in the morning, and she was living on coffee and sugar just to get through. She was hangry a lot. You know hangry? Hungry and angry is evil spawn. And she needed coffee. She needed an afternoon nap if she got it. But she was busy like volunteering everywhere. But so she barely got it. And then she couldn't go to sleep at night. She got a second wind right before bed. She's like, what the heck? I was tired all day long. Now I can't fall asleep. And she'd wake up in the night in a panic, like adrenaline rush. She went to her doctor. You're just getting older. That's what she was told. This is not aging. This is adrenal fatigue. This is HPA axis issues. Over the course of a year, we rehabbed the brain adrenal axis. She's doing fantastic. She's not having the problems anymore. She has great energy. She's lost weight. She's doing all her life, her retired life. Just because something's common doesn't make it normal. And these are things you can rehab and overcome and reverse. All right. Number 4, estrogen-progesterone imbalances. So this applies not only to women, obviously, but also to men as well. You have 3 estrogen metabolites, E1, E2, which are the predominant forms of estrogen, and they also, in excess, are associated with cancer and heart attack and stroke. And then E3 is the cancer fighter. And you need a balance of E1, E2, and then add those together, and then the ratio to E3. And also the total sum of E1, E2, and E3 with progesterone. So men also make estrogen. They aromatize testosterone from in the liver through aromatization, but men don't make estrogen out of their ovaries because they don't have ovaries. Do you guys know that? Second thing learned tonight, guys. I'm glad you came for that nugget. So we're aromatizing testosterone into estrogen, and men, this is linked to men having problems too, heart attack and stroke risks. A lot of problems here. So we have to look for men and women, not just for heart attack and stroke, but mood and weight loss resistance and hot flashes and these type of things. All right, number 5, gut problems. This is where I am a self-professed gut health nerd, guys. You ready for this? I'm so excited to nerd out on this for you guys. Your gut is 80% of your immune system. 80%. 95% of your body is serotonin, your healthy, happy neurotransmitter that SSRI, antidepressants work upon. 95% of your serotonin is made in your gut, stored in your gut. And they're formed from the same fetal tissue. When you were growing in your mom's womb, your gut and brain were formed from the same fetal tissue and are inextricably linked for the rest of your life through what's called the gut-brain axis, or the gut-brain connection. And if you think about it, the intestines even look like the brain. Have you ever thought about that before? Formed from the same fetal tissue, 95% of the serotonin is in your gut. So when people are nervous and about speaking in front of people, they run to the bathroom, that's the gut-brain axis. And there's a whole field of research looking at the gut-brain axis. So anxiety, depression, linked to the gut-brain axis. Autism, linked to the gut-brain axis. ADHD, linked to the gut-brain axis. Autoimmune conditions, linked to the gut-brain axis. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, you know, the Hippocratic Oath, he said all disease begins in the gut. I don't know how he knew it. Thousands of years ago in Greece. But that's why he's the father of medicine, isn't he? Now research is catching up with antiquity that about 90% of chronic health problems that we see today, at least to some degree, begin in the gut, if not entirely begin in the gut. This is a major factor. You do not have to have gut symptoms to have gut problems. Meaning many people with digestive or microbiome problems are going to the bathroom just fine, but they're having downstream systemic responses from an unhealthy microbiome. Microbiome is the term for all the trillions of bacteria in your gut. You have about 100 trillion bacteria in your gut. Isn't that gross? Not gross at all. You wouldn't be here without it. And you have about 10 trillion human cells. You have about 100 trillion bacteria. You are about 10 times more bacteria than human. A sort of sophisticated host for the microbiome. And it determines myelin sheath production, nerve production, determines neurotransmitter production. It converts 20% of your thyroid hormone. It is profoundly important. So this is a lab that we use. You heard of gluten, right? It's like a swear word. It's like the G word in health. It's not bad for everybody. So we have to find out what's good for one person and what's good for your body and what's bad for your body. What does your body love? What does your body hate? We're all different. So to say a cookie cutter approach and say everybody should be eating this, well, not necessarily. Let's find out what's right for the individual. So typically, especially as a health savvier person may think maybe gluten's not right for me, so you go to your doctor, hey, I want to know if I'm gluten intolerant or gluten sensitive. And they typically will run what? They'll run an alpha-gliadin test, maybe, and they'll test you for celiac disease. Well, those are about 2 pieces of about a 25-piece puzzle. So typically those can come back negative, and you go and celebrate, I'm not gluten intolerant, you go and celebrate and get breadsticks at Olive Garden. It's not enough to say, well, definitively ruled out. You can be negative against those biomarkers, but positive against other ones. So we run a full panel. This is not a quack lab, this is Cyrex lab, the Cleveland Clinic's Functional Medicine Center, who's trained myself, my team. These are reputable labs. Arista Vajdanis are the leading immunologists in this field in Phoenix, Arizona. The blood test to look at all the full arrays of the way that your immune system can react not only to grains, but to all foods. And what works for one person may not meet for the next person. Interestingly enough, transglutaminase 3 and 6, which are the other celiac tests that are typically not ran, the Celiac Society says about 80%, up to 80% of celiacs known, that most people don't know they have celiacs, because about 1% of the population has celiac disease, right? So most people don't know that they have it, and most celiacs do not have any severe gastrointestinal symptoms, meaning they're not having running away, GI pain, anything like that. But it's manifesting as a neurological problem. It's manifesting as runaway anxiety and depression and brain fog. Their body is not necessarily creating antibodies against transglutaminase 2, but against 3 and 6, which is attacking brain tissue and skin tissue, like skin rashes and flares and autoimmune type flares in their skin. So this is not only applicable for people with on one end of the gluten intolerance spectrum, but the whole other end as well. As if that wasn't bad enough, we also have cross-reactivity. This is the sort of case of mistaken identity, something called molecular mimicry. So foods, this is for the person who's gone gluten-free, but they're still having symptoms. Person who is trying to eat the healthy thing, but they're still feeling lousy. Because it's not enough to just say, well, it's just this bad guy, and then everything will be solved. If it were only that simplistic. So we have to look at the immune system's reactivity against these other healthy foods, like gluten-free grains, like rice and quinoa and corn. But let's look at some of these. Chocolate's on this, guys. This chocolate. Who likes chocolate in here? Me too. Chocolate's on here. Coffee's on here. What the heck? And also egg, which is in everything, and corn and rice and potato. Let's say egg is on here. Let's say rice is on here, and it's positive for the person. Are they having an egg sensitivity or a rice sensitivity or potato sensitivity? No. They're having a gluten sensitivity to egg, a gluten sensitivity to rice, a gluten sensitivity to potatoes. But these proteins in these healthy foods are similar enough in structure to gluten that your body says, I think that's gluten, and tags it with a gluten antibody. Molecular mimicry or cross-reactivity. Again, Arista Vajdanis, a leading immunologist in his field. This uncovers missing pieces to people's health puzzles. All right. This is intestinal permeability screen, something called leaky gut syndrome. Who's heard of leaky gut in here? Well-read people. It's an unfortunate name too, right? Leaky gut? What the heck? I'm glad you guys are done eating. Nasty. So things are passing through the gut that shouldn't be passing through the gut, like undigested food proteins, like the ones we just talked about, and even healthy foods can pass through the gut lining here. And then the immune system says, why is there a piece of kale in the bloodstream? I'm going to go and attack it. And then kale's causing reactivity. Or, a strawberry. Strawberry is causing activity. It's not the strawberry or the kale's fault. It's the intestinal permeability issue. Something else that can pass through the gut lining is gram-negative bacterial endotoxins called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. LPS are bacterial toxins that are in the gut from gram-negative bacteria that can pass through the gut lining, causing inflammation throughout the body. This is linked to all types of health problems like anxiety, depression, thyroid problems, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, elevated LPS. because of intestinal permeability issues. There's hundreds of studies on PubMed about this mechanism problem. It's not tested for anybody in the mainstream model of care. Why? Because there's no medication for it. If they had a medication for it, believe me, everyone would be tested for this because it's so ubiquitous. All right, and they're actually working on a drug for it. It's in development, and believe me, then everyone will be tested for this. It's on the market. It's in development now. Okay, so this is an issue. So we're measuring antibody against lipopolysaccharides and to occludin and zonulin. Occludin and zonulin are the proteins that govern your gut lining permeability. Think of zonulin, bless you. Think of zonulin like a zipper and occludin as an occluder. So if your body's attacking those proteins, those gut gatekeepers, your body's going to have increased permeability issues. So, let me say this too. As someone can have leaky gut syndrome, they also can have leaky brain syndrome, increased blood-brain barrier permeability, brain inflammation. It's linked to Alzheimer's and anxiety and depression, and this is associated, LPS is elevated with anxiety and depression issues. Because there's a whole field of research called the cytokine model of cognitive function. Basically, how inflammation impacts how your brain works. So anxiety, depression, brain fog, ADD, ADHD, autism are all linked to these pro-inflammatory cytokine activities. This is a microbiome test. Looking for the landscape of the microbiome and the balance of the bacteria. Here we see a yeast and fungal overgrowth, and we also have parasitic overgrowths as well. This patient, a girl in her 20s, did not have any digestive symptoms. She was going to the bathroom just fine, but she had runaway anxiety. She took all the Xanaxes she wanted, but at best it took the edge off. But there was something going on in her second brain that was impacting her first brain. There was something going on in her gut that was impacting the inflammation in her brain. Over the course of 18 months, 12 to 18 months, she started feeling better within the first month, but it took about 18 to 24 months for her to completely get better. Now she's doing fantastic. She's a health coach and talking about all the stuff we're talking about tonight. Many of our patients end up being health coaches and doctors because of their own suffering that they've gone through. All right, this is multiple autoimmune reactivity. There's over 100 autoimmune diseases that we know today in science, and another 40 in addition to the 100 that have at least an autoimmune component. So, MS, Parkinson's, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's, lupus, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, celiac disease. These are the most common, Hashimoto's disease, the most common autoimmune diseases. The problem with these health problems are that they're end-stage problems by the time they are labeled with an ICD-10 code. So for example, there has to be 90% destruction of your adrenal glands before they'll label it as Addison's disease or autoimmune adrenal disease. 90% destruction. There has to be 80% destruction of your villi for it to show up in a biopsy and for them to catch it and call it celiac disease. There has to be 70% destruction of your myelin sheath, your brain, before they'll see it on an imaging study and call it MS. Did those happen overnight? No, they did not. They happened, took 10 years on average before it's bad enough for them to call it something. So there are people on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum that go from doctor to doctor to doctor. They may have a positive ANA. Maybe the doctor will say, oh, it looks like lupus, it looks autoimmune, but basically come back when it's bad enough for us to give you a steroid or immunosuppressant. What sense does it make to wait till the body's destroyed enough of itself to then give you a steroid or a Humira or another autoimmune immunosuppressant? That's a reactive way of dealing with things. What can you do now to decrease risk factors? What can you do now to take responsibility for your health? So there's 3 stages on the autoimmune inflammation spectrum. There's silent autoimmunity, stage 1. And then stage 2, autoimmune reactivity, stage 2. And then stage 3 is the full-blown autoimmune disease. Stage 2 is where many of our patients are at, where they're not bad enough to be labeled with an ICD-10, which most of our patients are full-blown autoimmune disease. But stage 2 is where most people suffer and they don't know why. They have a pile of labs and really no answer. So we have a heart for people on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum, a passion for them, because there's so much that can be done and they don't know why they're suffering. So this is a test that shows, is your body creating antibodies or attack flags for destruction so we're looking at stomach tissue, joint tissue, adrenal tissue, ovary tissue, collagen tissue, brain tissue. We see many people with balance issues. They have like vertigo, and they have balance antibodies against their cerebellum, their brain. We see many people with cognitive decline. They have brain issues and brain fog and depression and anxiety. They have elevated antibodies against their brain tissue, something called neurological autoimmunity. They take all these psychotropic drugs, they take the anxiety and the depression medications, but they still feel lousy. If you have a family history of autoimmune disease, you need to rule this out. If you have symptoms despite doing everything your doctors told you to do, you need to rule this out. And it's something that we see, sadly, a lot. Toxins. Since World War II, our world has been inundated with toxins. That was what, prior to World War II, not on the human landscape, not on the earth. So our genes are living in a brand new world, a brave new world. And what researchers are hypothesizing at this point is this mismatch between our genes, which have not changed in 10,000 years, and the world around us, which has changed very dramatically over a very short period of time. So not only toxins, but the food supply, the crossbreeding and hybridization. So the grains, for example, in biblical times, grains were not once they are different now. They've hybridized them for mass production. They've genetically modified corn and soy. They are different. And also the spraying and the glyphosate and all of the Roundup and all of that stuff. This is a mismatch between our genes, which has been unchanged for 10,000 years, and the world around us. So toxins are one player into this epigenetic new world that our genome, our DNA, is living. So we are looking at not only are we exposed to toxins or aren't we, which we basically all are to some degree, but the variable is what is your individual tolerance to these toxins. So some people can smoke a pack a day and live to their 90, and some people can never smoke a day in their life and get cancer from secondhand smoke and then die from cancer. Does that make smoking healthy? No, it doesn't. But what's the individual biological variability tolerance to smoking or toxins or any other stressor that you're talking about? So here we're looking at, is your immune system creating inflammation against environmental toxins like heavy metals, maybe Detroit, like Flint, Michigan, like what's going on in the water supply there. Like this isn't like rare. This is in our waters. This is in our soil. This is everywhere. Some people can handle it. Some people can't. So we have to look at biological variability. Number 7, inflammation. Every health problem that we talked about today have one thing in common, and that's chronic low-grade systemic inflammation. I bumped my elbow and it swells up, and that's acute inflammation. We would all be goners without healthy inflammation levels, but it's subject to the Goldilocks principle. Not too high, not too low, but just right. So excess inflammation, this hyperinflammation, is where problems begin. So we are looking at if your body is creating inflammation. So we run C-reactive protein, or CRP. We want this below 1. High levels of it are linked to health problems. Number 2, homocysteine. Above 7 has been shown to increase blood-brain barrier permeability. It's linked to Alzheimer's. Dr. Brenda Zinn, a colleague of mine at UCLA, his goal and our goal in functional medicine is below 7. He's reversing cognitive decline. Alzheimer's patients, you saw the news piece that we did. Alzheimer's is referred to in the medical literature as type 3 diabetes because it's actually insulin resistance and inflammation in the brain. So we want homocysteine under 7 units per millimole, and methylation impairments. Methylation is this big biochemical superhighway. It makes your brain healthy, it makes your hormones healthy, it makes your gut healthy, it makes your detox pathways healthy, and it's super important. So I'm going to dig into a little bit of this right now. Who's heard of MTHFR? It's not an acronym for a swear word, guys. Get your mind out of the gutter. You dirty people. It is the acronym for the enzyme that converts folic acid into folate. Why do you need folic acid to convert into folate? Because it's a methyl donor. It's a carbon-hydrogen CH3 group it's like methylation gasoline. It makes your brain healthy. It makes your gut healthy. It makes your detox pathways healthy. It recycles homocysteine inflammation into methionine. You need this healthy gene. But what if you don't have it? You can't change your genes. Guys, everything we talked about so far is epigenetic. The adrenal fatigue, the thyroid issues, all this stuff, epigenetic. You can reverse it and overcome it and change it and improve it. Can you change your genes? No, you can't. This is one thing you can't change. But when you know what you're up against, you can do something about it. So if you know your genetic weaknesses, do extra to support that, to decrease and mitigate the risk factors. But you have to know what you're up against to do something about it. There's almost 100% overlap between this gene mutation and Hashimoto's disease, autoimmune thyroiditis. Meaning almost every person with Hashimoto's has this gene mutation. I have a double mutation at the C677T gene, which means that my body does not methylate up to 80% less than it should be. So I have to be extra vigilant to supporting this gene mutation. But there's autoimmune conditions on both sides of my family. Type 1 diabetes, my little nephew. I have neurological autoimmune, Hashimoto's on both sides of my family. I have to do what I can to decrease my risk factors. Most people with Hashimoto's have this. But MTHFR is just one gene. There's like many genes. This is the Beyonce of methylation, but there's many less famous guys that I want to talk about. So MTHFR is associated with ADHD, autism, autoimmune diseases, bipolar disorder, cardiovascular disease, colitis, depression, schizophrenia. You have to know what you're up against to do something about it. So we run tests to find out what's going on with your methylation panel. This is AHCY gene. This is an enzyme that breaks down the amino acid methionine. And people that have a double mutation here do well with SAMe supplementation to basically calm anxiety and calm their mood and balance their mood because their body's not so good at doing it on their own. BHMT gene plays a role in choline oxidation, which you need choline from a neurotransmitter standpoint. It makes acetylcholine, and it's needed for attention, so it's associated with ADHD when you have a double mutation. CBS gene, this is not the network, is the other one. So people with a double mutation of the CBS gene need to limit sulfur-rich foods like dairy, eggs, dried fruit, and legumes, all healthy foods. But even healthy foods may not work for the next person, depending not only on epigenetics, but genes as well. COMT genes is associated with ADHD, anxiety, and OCD. It's needed for healthy neurotransmitter function. MEO gene is associated with histamine intolerance, people that can't handle wine or fermented foods or these type of histamine-rich foods. Their body's not breaking down histamine properly. Even bone broth, which is supposed to be super healthy, these people don't tolerate bone broth because of their histamine intolerance, so they have to support this gene weakness. MTRR gene is needed, they typically need higher levels of B12 because their body's not activating it there, and they also need lithium typically from a mood balance standpoint. And again, these are all linked to autoimmune conditions and thyroid issues. And then VDR gene. VDR is a vitamin D receptor site polymorphism. So this gene mutation means your body doesn't absorb vitamin D very well. You take vitamin D, and every time you test it, it never comes up. This is oftentimes a VDR problem. So you have to extra dosage vitamin D higher to get your vitamin D to 60 to 80, which is the actual functional range. But the reference range for vitamin D is 30 to 100. So you want to actually be up to 60 to 80 for the optimal vitamin D level. So this is what I do for mine. I support my MTHFR with B vitamins and green leafy vegetables and sulfur-rich vegetables and grass-fed liver. Everybody likes liver, right? Dr. Berkowitz? I remember you talking to you. It's right. Dr. Berkowitz and I talk about liver more than once. Okay, so how to manage your MTHFR, manage stress levels, avoid synthetic folic acid. Why do you want to not take folic acid if you have MTHFR? Because your body can't activate it. So you can get toxic levels if you're trying to do the good thing, taking folic acid. If you're not activating it, it's not good. And supplement with keep lithium balance as well. All right, all of this stuff. Epigenetics, environmental things, and genetics. What would you think of me if my check engine light came on my car, I covered it up and kept on driving? What would you think of me?
Like the rest of
it. Yeah. Normally I have someone say that. It's impending doom. We're in denial if we're doing that, right? But we're doing this to our body all the time. The fatigue, the weight loss resistance, the symptoms, all the stuff is a check engine light. So what do? We go to the check engine light, cover up, or see you in 6 months. But our body is more brilliant than a car because its check engine light gets brighter. You can see the light glaring underneath the sticker. So what do? You go back and get more check engine light cover-uppers, more milligrams, more amounts of them. You can still see it glaring underneath the sticker. I love my Toyota, but I know God is a better engineer than Toyota is. And if we are treating our cars this way, can we treat ourselves as well as we treat our cars? Because when you take your car to the mechanic, because the check engine light is on, what does the mechanic do? He hooks up your car to what? Diagnostics or a computer. He doesn't cover the check engine light and see you in 6 months. If he does, get a new mechanic. He looks at what's misfiring underneath the hood. All the stuff we talked about, I know some of it's probably overwhelming and over your heads, but all of that stuff is what's underneath the hood. All of that stuff's what's misfiring to cause the check engine light to be on in the first place. We are not sick from a check engine light cover-up or deficiency. So what's underneath the hood that's misfiring, that's causing the symptoms to be there in the first place? So we are basically diagnostic, mechanics, body mechanics, to look at these underlying pathway dysfunctions that's giving rise of the check engine light, that's giving rise of the symptom of the ICD-10 code. All right. We are all complex. So these are the ways that we find out what's relevant for you, what's irrelevant to you, and we start with comprehensive diagnostics. Do you need every lab under the sun? No, you do not. We want to do a comprehensive health history to find what actually is pertinent to you. We want to be streamlined and be practical and streamlined to the labs that you need for your body. Number 2, customized food medicine plan. I didn't even mention food reactivities because that's a bigger topic, but even healthy foods like vegetables and fruits can flare some people out. If you're eating salad and you don't feel well, it's not the salad's fault. What's going on here? We have to find out what's going on in the body to cause these overreactivities to healthy foods. So we provide recipes and meal plans and eating out guides based on the individual's labs and their health history and what's relevant to their life. And then we get natural medicine. So there's herbs and micronutrients. We will order them from functional medicine labs to deal with what's on the labs. My goal is to get you off of those and use food as medicine wherever we can. So that is the next thing, is lifestyle coaching, which means we're all good at 3 weeks of this and then 4 weeks of that. But then what? This is not a quick fix. This is a life intervention. This is a journey. What has taken years to get to where it's at today is going to take time. And you have to take this seriously, and we have to keep you accountable to that. Functional medicine, clinical oversight, which just is us clinically monitoring you and making sure that you're moving in the right direction. And then accountability and structure. We have people do food logs, and they have unlimited access to us in between visits. When they're having a rough day, they can reach out to us, and we can keep them accountable, and that provides good results. So as your doctor is frustrated too, they have really tried everything that they can, because all they have to give is medications for your ICD-10 code. And even if they wanted to do more, their hands are proverbially tied behind their back. Most of my colleagues are in the mainstream model of care. Most of the people moving through the Institute for Functional Medicine are in primary care or in the hospitals. But they have 5 minutes to be with you because they're overbooked. And they're leaving mainstream medicine to actually get people well because the system's not set up to get well. They have no time with you. And they're told they can do X, Y, and Z, and it's the medications they want to put you on, and that's all. That's how the system's set up. And a lot of people ask me, well, all this stuff you're talking about, if it's so important, why doesn't my doctor tell me about this? If it's so important, why aren't they running these labs? It doesn't change the treatment. All they're going to do is give you the medications. So it's superfluous lab testing to run labs if the end result's still going to be the medication. So it's like asking a mechanic to tell you about gardening. You cannot expect a system that's not designed for health to provide you health. So we, and I think this speaks loudly, our top patient base, UPMC employees, nurses. We have more nurses and scrubs as patients than any profession. And I think that speaks loudly. It's why over the past 10 years our nurses, most of my patients, is because they know way more than most people on health, sometimes more than me, but they know their system's not set up for their health. So frequently asked questions, why doesn't my doctor do all this? I think we answered that. Number 2, insurance. Does insurance cover functional medicine? Largely speaking, no. It's going to offset maybe the cost of the blood test, but largely speaking, it's not going to pay for you to get healthy. And it breaks my heart of people who depend on a system that's not designed for their health. I had a patient tell me once, depending on my health insurance for my health is like depending on my life insurance for my life. And if I depended on my health insurance for health, he said, I better have good life insurance. Health insurance is fantastic for crisis care, trauma, surgery, life-saving surgeries. But is it going to pay for chronic health care for you to get healthy? No. It's going to pay for the medications, maybe, but oftentimes not even that. I talk to so many seniors that are in the donut hole to medications they don't cover. So they're not going to pay for the medications all the time. They're certainly not going to pay for you to get healthy and get off the medications. Why? We've talked to UPMC about this. It's because people without an ICD-10 code, people that are healthy, do not spend money in the system. They lose money. Going back to the World Health Organization, there's an inherent conflict of interest between the legitimate business goals of providers and actually what's rational for us as consumers. So we do everything we can. I mean, for the past 10 years, all of our patients are working class people, and this is not a big deal. You just cannot depend on your health insurance for your health.